We are back on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio, News Talk, 1180, 1230 KGEO, 1410 KERI, now in Albuquerque, New Mexico on 1000 KKIM, and 3 times a week on the internet on knookmedia.com. So, Clay, what do you think of Tom Lackey?
I think Tom would do a great job if he gets up there, as long as he doesn't try to do too much at one time.
Well, right now he's leading in the polls. I think he's got a good chance. So, it'll be an interesting race.
Well, the way things are looking, we need some more people like him up there.
Yeah, we do. Our next guest is one we've had the pleasure of having on before, a man who will always be remembered for his brave actions on November 22nd, 1963, in Dallas, Secret Service agent Clint Hill. Clint, welcome back to Taking Care of Business.
Hello, Clint.
Hi, how is it going?
Oh, it's going well. Hey, I've been watching you on Facebook. You are really, really a busy man. You've been traveling around quite a bit.
Oh, yes, we have. We've been all across the country in the United States, and we've been various places throughout the world, Australia, Italy, Norway, Sweden. So we have been moving around a bit.
Wow. So do you like the traveling aspect of it?
Yes, I do. It gets a little tiring sometimes, but it's quite enjoyable.
Oh, sure, definitely. Now, you've got the 2 great books out, and I've read them both. 5 Days in November, which we talked about last time you were on, and that one talks about the 5 days surrounding the Kennedy assassination.
Correct.
And the second book, I guess, which was the first book you wrote, is Mrs. Kennedy and Me, which I thought for the most part, other than the section leading up to Dallas, was a pretty fun book. There's a lot of great stories in there about Mrs. Kennedy and, some of her idiosyncrasies, which we all have. It was a fun book.
Well, I'm glad you found it that way. It was an interesting time. We had a lot of wonderful experiences, and then, of course, we went through that dark period as well.
Sure, yeah, during the obvious assassination. Now, Lisa tells me you've got a 3rd book coming out. Tell us about that book.
Well, we're in the process of writing that book. Mm-hmm. It's a book that will encompass the periods from 1958 to 1975, which includes 5 administrations, the Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford administrations, and that was the period of time that I was involved in presidential protection.
What did you think of President Nixon?
Well, he was quite an intelligent man. When he was the vice president, he had a lot of respect. He did a lot of things. I think, unfortunately, he got surrounded by a very poor staff that weren't so much interested in the well-being of the people of the United States or even of President Nixon, but more about power for themselves, and that was his downfall.
What was he like working for?
Well, he was a very energetic, ambitious guy, a political professional. He'd been in politics all his life, had won some and lost some. So, he was just one of those people that he really loved politics and stayed with it until he finally had to give it up because of what had happened in Watergate.
I remember I was in the Marines, and I remember they used to fly Air Force One. In fact, you probably were there. They flied Air Force One into El Toro and then would take Marine One to take it to San Clemente. And mm-hmm. I remember we used to watch that as it flew in. But,
oh, really? Yeah, many times.
Yep, long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you were part of the Johnson detail, but initially he didn't want to have anything to do with the Kennedy people. Can you tell us a little about that?
Well, when I left Mrs. Kennedy 1 year after the assassination, right after the election in 1964, and I was then reassigned to the White House detail. President Johnson was in power, and one of my first assignments was to go down to the LBJ Ranch in Texas in 1964. I think it was in late November. And I had met him previously. He had come to New York to see Mrs. Kennedy during 1964 when she was living in New York. And so he knew who I was. And he spotted me down at the ranch. And he put the word out to a couple of the agents that he had with him as vice president and who he had a lot of confidence and trust in, that he didn't think it was a good idea for me to be there, to be on that particular detail, because he wasn't sure he could trust me. He thought that I was too devoted to the Kennedys. And they talked to him for a while about me and about my past, the fact that I had been with President Eisenhower, and then I was put on the Kennedy detail and after the election in 1960, but I was a professional. And they finally convinced him that it would be in his best interest to have me stay, which I did. And over a period of time, that was in 1964, over a period of time, I got to know him better, and he got to know me better. And it finally got to the point where there were some changes to be made, and I was placed in charge as the agent in charge of his protection. So that was what happened over a period of, I guess, 3 years, how much it can change from not wanting somebody around you to having somebody around you that you trust with your life.
We're having a conversation with Secret Service agent Clint Hill.
Clint, how big is the staff that protects a president?
Well, it varies. Way back in the Eisenhower and up into the Kennedy days, we had about 40 agents assigned to the White House. During the Kennedy administration, for example, we had 2 agents assigned to Mrs. Kennedy. I was one. We had 3 agents assigned to the 2 children, and that left 35 agents between surrounding the president, handling all the transportation requirements, that kind of thing. It really meant that there were only 5 agents with the president, really, plus a supervisor at any one time.
Do you happen to know how many agents there are surrounding Obama at this time?
No, I have no idea.
I see. And there's the Secret Service, there's the CIA, there's the FBI. Each one has a different responsibility. Is that correct?
Well, absolutely true, yes.
And so the Secret Service is strictly dedicated to the White House?
No.
What's the Secret Service's position, or what do they do?
Secret Service was formed back in 1865.
Oh, the year Clay was born here.
Yeah,
67.
About that time. It happened to be in April of 1865, and there was a problem in the United States with counterfeit currency, so much so that it was devaluing the value of the dollar. So the Secretary of the Treasury met with President Lincoln, and they decided to form an investigative unit to go out and suppress counterfeiting. Well, that particular piece of paper lay on the president's desk that day because he was busy. He was going to go to the theater that night.
Oh, boy.
And he did, and he was assassinated. Now, there was no Secret Service in existence at the time. Then in July of 1865, the new president found this plan, and they decided to form the unit, and they called it the United States Secret Service. And the job at that time was strictly to suppress counterfeiting, handle any forgery situations with bonds or treaties or instruments of that type. And that continued on, and then there were other attempts at presidents. Finally, in 1901, when McKinley was assassinated in Buffalo, New York, they finally decided that it was time to assign people to protect the President of the United States. And so Theodore Roosevelt, who had become president after the assassination, was given that protection. And that has continued up to today, and it has grown insofar as who receives protection continuously over a period of time.
You know, one of those quirks of history, I remember Lincoln's son. Obviously, his dad was assassinated. Then he was in the cabinet, Garfield's cabinet. He was there when Garfield was assassinated. And then he was just getting off the train a couple blocks away in Buffalo when McKinley was assassinated. I thought, boy, that's just a... You know, after that, he said, that's it, I'm done with politics. So,
yeah, I would think so.
Yeah. One of the stories, well, actually, let's wait until after the break. One of those stories in that great book, Mrs. Kennedy and Me, that I want to ask you about.
Sure. Glad to tell you.
We'll be back in a moment on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio News Talk 1180.